thought this was the breaking point, that this was the moment it all came crashing down, and maybe for a while it did. Maybe you lost something, someone, or even yourself along the way. But I came to remind you, this is not your final chapter. This is the part where God starts building something new. There comes a moment in life when everything seems to fall apart. The dreams you built, the relationships you cherished, the confidence you once had, it all feels like it's slipping through your fingers. And in that moment, the enemy wants you to believe that this is the end, that this is where your story stops. But what if I told you that the breaking point is not your burial ground, it's your breakthrough moment? See, we tend to view brokenness as something to be ashamed of. We think that if we hit rock bottom, we failed. But I need you to understand something. God does his best work in broken places. When everything else is stripped away, when the mask comes off, when you're left with nothing but raw, unfiltered pain, that is the place where transformation begins. If you've ever seen a seed before it grows, you know that before it can bloom, it first has to be buried. It has to be placed in the dark. It has to be broken open. But inside that breaking, there is life waiting to push through. That's what's happening to you right now. You're not being destroyed. You're being prepared. But here's the problem. Most people give up at the breaking point. They see the loss, the failure, the disappointment, and they assume that's all there is. But what if the very thing that's breaking you is the thing that's making you? What if the heartbreak, the rejection, the closed doors, the moments you felt unworthy, what if all of it was shaping you for what's next? Look at your life. Look at where you've been. Every time you thought you wouldn't make it, you did. Every time you thought you were finished, you found strength you didn't even know you had. That's because God is in the business of using broken things. He takes the shattered pieces of our past and builds something new. The breaking point is painful, but it's also necessary. Because if we're honest, some of us wouldn't move if we weren't forced to. We would stay in toxic relationships, in unfulfilling jobs, in places where we were never meant to remain. But God loves us too much to let us settle. So sometimes he allows the breaking not to punish us, but to push us, to shift us into purpose, to remove what was never meant for us and make space for something greater. So don't despise your breaking season. Don't curse the pain. Don't run from the process. Because what feels like the end is actually a beginning. You are being refined. You are being strengthened. You are being positioned. And when you come out of this, because you will come out of this, you won't just be restored, you'll be rebuilt. You'll be wiser, stronger, bolder, and more powerful than ever before. There comes a time when you have to stop identifying with who you were and start embracing who you are becoming. Too many of us are still walking around wearing the labels of our past, carrying the weight of who we used to be, what we used to do, and where we used to fall short. But I need you to hear me. You are not who you used to be. The enemy loves to keep you tied to an old version of yourself, because if he can trap you in yesterday, he can keep you from stepping into your tomorrow. He will remind you of every mistake you made, every wrong turn, every failure, and every moment of doubt. But the enemy only attacks what he fears, and he wouldn't be fighting you so hard if there wasn't something powerful on the other side of your transformation. You are in the process of becoming. That means there are parts of you that are still developing, still growing, still stretching. And that process can feel uncomfortable because becoming requires shedding. It requires letting go of the mindset, the habits, and even some of the people who were tied to your past season. Becoming means surrendering. It means allowing yourself to be uncomfortable in transition because you trust that what's ahead is worth the process. Think about a caterpillar. It goes through a season of isolation, wrapped in a cocoon, seemingly trapped. But that moment of confinement is where the transformation happens. The struggle, the breaking, the stretching. It's all necessary for the butterfly to emerge. And when it does, it can never go back to crawling on the ground. You too are in transition. You are evolving. The old version of you had to be broken down so that a greater version of you could rise. But here's the challenge. You have to be willing to embrace your becoming even when you don't fully recognize yourself yet. Even when you're still finding your wings. Even when people around you don't understand the shift. Some people will only see you as who you used to be. They will remind you of your past, call you by your former name, and expect you to stay the same. But don't you dare shrink back. Don't you dare apologize for your growth. What God is doing in you is too big, too powerful, too necessary for you to hold on to what no longer fits. There is a version of you that is waiting to emerge, a version that is stronger, wiser, bolder, and anointed. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to take the next step, to trust that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. So I dare you today, step into your becoming. Don't look back. Don't second guess. Don't let fear keep you bound. You are growing, you are evolving, and you are just getting started. Faith is not just believing when everything is going well. Faith is believing when everything is falling apart. It's standing in the middle of the storm with tears in your eyes, fear in your heart, and uncertainty ahead, yet still saying, God, I trust you. The enemy wants to shake your faith because he knows that if he can weaken your belief, he can keep you stuck. He knows that if he can get you to doubt who you are and whose you are, he can stop you from walking into the promise God has for you. And that's why the attacks feel so strong. That's why the obstacles seem relentless. That's why it feels like every time you take one step forward, something comes to push you 2 steps back. But what if I told you that the opposition is actually confirmation? That the very fact that you are facing resistance is proof that you are stepping into something greater. Because faith is not about what you see, it's about what you know. And even when everything around you is screaming that it won't work, that you aren't enough, that you should give up, faith tells you to keep going. Think about Peter when he stepped out onto the water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he walked above the very thing that should have drowned him. But the moment he focused on the wind, the waves, the fear, he started sinking. And some of us have been sinking, not because God isn't with us, but because we've been too focused on the storm instead of. Faith requires focus. It requires trust. It requires walking when you don't know where the road leads, believing when you don't see results yet, and standing when everything in you wants to sit down and quit. Faith is the currency of the kingdom. You don't get to the next level without it. You don't access the promises of God without it. You don't step into your destiny without it. But let's be honest, faith isn't always easy. Because faith will stretch you. It will challenge you. It will make you uncomfortable. Faith will tell you to apply for the job when you don't feel qualified. Faith will tell you to start the business when you don't have the resources. Faith will tell you to walk away from something that feels familiar because God has something better waiting for you. And here's the truth. Fear and faith cannot operate in the same space. One will always override the other. So today you have to make a decision. Will you let fear keep you bound, or will you let faith push you forward? I dare you to choose faith, to believe that God is making a way even when you can't see it, to trust that He's already gone before you, preparing everything you need, to walk like the promise is already yours. Because if God said it, He will do it. There comes a point in your journey when you have to make a decision. Will you hold on to what's behind you, or will you reach for what's ahead? You can't do both. You can't embrace the future God has for you while still clinging to the past that broke you. At some point, you have to release so that you can rise. Some of us have been carrying dead weight for too long. We've been dragging pain, disappointment, and betrayal into a new season, wondering why we feel stuck. But I need you to understand something. You cannot take old baggage into a new blessing. The things that hurt you, the people who left, the doors that closed, it all served its purpose. But now it's time to move forward. See, the enemy loves to keep you tied to your past because he knows that as long as you're looking back, you won't move ahead. He'll remind you of every failure, every rejection, every mistake, hoping that the weight of it will keep you from stepping into your next level. But God is calling you higher. He is calling you to rise above what tried to break you, to walk boldly into what He has prepared for you. And you cannot do that if your hands are full of what no longer serves you. Think about an eagle. It soars high, not because of its strength alone, but because it knows when to let go. It doesn't carry unnecessary weight. It doesn't stay in places that no longer nourish it. It understands that to rise, it has to release. So what are you holding on to that's keeping you from rising? Is it the pain of your past, the opinion of people, the fear of failure, the guilt of mistakes you've already been forgiven for? Whatever it is, God is telling you that it's time to let it go. You can't heal if you keep reopening the wound. You can't grow if you're still chained to what's behind you. Yes, letting go is hard. Yes, walking away from what's familiar feels uncomfortable, but your destiny is worth more than your comfort. And sometimes the very thing you're afraid to release is the thing that's been holding you back. This is your season to rise, to step into the fullness of who you were created to be, to stop apologizing for your growth, to stop explaining your elevation to people who were never meant to go where you're going. So today, make a decision. Release it. Release the fear. Release the doubt. Release the bitterness. Release the need for closure, the need for validation, the need to control everything. Because the moment you release is the moment you rise. And when you rise, you'll realize that everything you thought you lost was nothing compared to what God had waiting for you. This is your time. Now rise.